Ladies and gentlemen, if you're familiar with the channel, then you already know that I'm relatively new to watching pro wrestling, and something that I love to do is ask the pro wrestling related questions to the community, and you guys are usually pretty quick to help me out. But I figured today, maybe we just go straight to the source. And so I asked you very kindly to feast your eyes on Dijak himself. Welcome, Dijak. I appreciate you taking the time.
Man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what I learn and a lot of what I gain from the wrestling community is unfortunately through the internet. And it's through the internet wrestling community, which I was warned about early on. And I will admit, I probably didn't heed the warning as much as I should have.
Me neither.
As a pro wrestler, I'm sure you've heard the term thrown around, buried.
Yeah.
What does that term mean, either to you specifically or from a wrestler, compared to how maybe you've seen it used online anytime somebody they think should be getting a push just gets a loss they didn't expect?
So it's funny to me and to most pro wrestlers in the business. It's almost like a scale, you know. Here's the worst form of buried. The worst form of buried is just not used, right? Because
Yeah.
you just don't exist. Uh, so that's when I would see like the most. And it's funny because that doesn't really translate so much online. Like it'll pop up like every so often. Someone's name will start trending or whatever, and they'll be like, "Oh, why isn't X, Y, and Z being used?" They haven't been on whatever show in a very long time, and then it kind of fades away. But for the most part, you don't really see a lot of the the quote unquote outrage and animosity and the throwing around of the word buried and burials and stuff like that until someone's in an angle on television that people don't like, which is always interesting to me because in some ways that's usually better than just not existing, right? Like obviously it's a fine it's a bit of a fine line in that there can be things that where you can look back and say, oh, it might have been better if they were just off TV for a few months and then came back with something good as opposed to being on
If it's
TV
bad
with
enough, yeah.
right, exactly. I'm going to be honest, I don't subscribe to that too much. I don't think that's a real thing. I've seen too much in the pro wrestling space where all they have to do is snap their fingers and somebody's a star. If they say you're a star, they being any professional wrestling
Hmm.
company, if that professional wrestling company just says you're a star, pretty quickly you're a star. There's very little that's unrecoverable in professional wrestling, right? You can take some of the silliest gimmicks or people that said quote unquote this was career suicide or whatever phrase people want to use, and if they just give you like 3 weeks of you're just really good and you beat everybody and you win the championship, people forget about that stuff really quickly because that's just the presentation. So I've never subscribed to like an on-screen thing being a burial. To me, a burial is just being off television. Just you're not there, you're making no headway, you're not making any ground, and you don't exist, right? And even in a sense, that's not so much a burial because you're still getting paid if you're
Hmm.
employed by that company. So I mean, there's always a positive to look at, to look at. But yeah, I can see why the phrase gets thrown around like, oh, this guy loses all the time. He loses all these matches. He's getting buried. In our eyes, not so much.
Okay, so that was kind of my hypothesis on it, was that if you're still being shown on TV, and if you're still being used, there's probably still a plan for you. Likely, is that fair to say, or is that jumping a little too far?
The word plan gets thrown around a lot in
Okay, feel free to
professional.
correct me, because
Yeah.
I would just assume with limited TV time, if they're carving out something for you, there's probably something that they want to do with you. No,
Not always.
really?
Yes. A lot of the time it's just a means to it. Television is so volatile. It
Hmm.
changes so quickly and so rapidly. And I know people joke about quote unquote plans change. A plan is just just a vague idea. Like people, I think people have this misconception that like there's like this like book and it's like here's exactly what we're gonna do with this person. Here's exactly what, and it's like
I'd
that
be
doesn't
lying if I
exist.
said I didn't picture like a board with strings attached and here's where we're going to
Yes.
be in July of 2026. So it's a little more short term then and more of a vague.
very much feel I very much feel and this isn't any specific company. I think it's every company across the board. I think that at the top of the card, they have a quote unquote plan in place for like here's who the world champion is. Here's where we expect the world champion to be in this amount of time. Here's who we expect to take the championship off of them. And then I think for the most part, barring some completely unforeseen circumstance like an injury or like a massive whatever, that usually takes place because you can make those things happen through booking, right? Like if that's your quote unquote plan, it probably happens.
Mhm.
Um, as you travel further down the card, there's less and less of that. It just becomes like timing, really. It's just timing. It's we
Okay.
need this tonight, we need this tonight. Oh, that works here. Oh, well, this will pop the crowd. This will, and you just kind of piece it together as it goes. Again, as it goes further and further down, I think that becomes more and more the case, right? There's probably a little bit more of a plan as you go further and further up. It's just the nature of the beast. I don't think anyone's angry about it. Maybe people are frustrated with where they are in that hierarchy, which is completely understandable. But everybody kind of understands how that works and why. So I don't think anyone's uh, frustrated with that specific portion of it.
All right, so we talked a little bit on like the booking side of it, but I have as someone who's always just super curious and passionate about stuff that's in the ring, uh one of the questions that's always kind of stood out to me, and some of these questions were submitted in by patrons of the community, and this is one that I kind of want to pull from. Um, how much of a match of a general, your typical match, is going to be fully planned out step by step versus in the moment having to just, I guess, use your skill, use your experience to kind of improvise together and make the match work?
It's a great question. It varies. It varies between shows. It varies between wrestlers. So there's no one correct answer. I'll say this much on television and specifically on pay-per-views. A lot of it depends on how much preparation time you have. The more preparation time you have, the more you can prepare. Obviously, I'll give you an example. The NXT takeovers are a rare case where the card fairly distant in advance, especially 5 years ago, right? The NXT Black and Gold, those cards were set like 3 to 4 weeks in advance to the point where we knew a month in advance who we were wrestling on those takeovers, with an exception. It's funny now that I say it because I was only on 2 or 3 of them or whatever. Um, the takeover war games that I did was the only example that I can think of where we didn't know like the day of who like our
Oh,
it was that war games where Kevin Owens was the surprise participant. And we didn't find out that Kevin was set in stone until like maybe that morning. And then he didn't get to the venue until like I don't know 1 p.m. or so. So it was very unique in that we didn't get to plan out a lot of that match like weeks in advance.
is that
Whereas
stressful? Being ones who are maybe already were in it and then someone's
no,
added that morning?
no, and I'll tell you why, because everyone in that match was a seasoned professional. Every single person in that match was a seasoned professional. Whereas I'll give you a different example, like NXT, the newer version of it that I was just on has a lot of people who have very, very little experience. So in those cases, yeah, you want time to go over stuff with some of these people. I was wrestling some people who it was their first match on live national television.
Mhm.
I don't want to. finding out that you don't know how to take an arm drag on live national television. Not that I ever encountered that, but there was it, and I had the great fortune through my run of working with a lot of seasoned professionals in that aspect. But I also worked with a lot of people who didn't have a ton of experience because that's just the way that brand trended at that point. Um, so yeah, long story short, you try your best to make it as interesting as a match as possible. And a big portion of professional wrestling is treating something as though you don't know what's going to happen, right?
Mhm.
Because even if you and this is basic fundamentals of acting. I take acting classes now with one of the top acting teachers in the world, Howard Fine. He's my acting coach. And the essence of acting is you know the words, you know the script, you know what's coming, but you need to put yourself in a mental space where you don't expect what's going to happen. That's a big piece of professional wrestling that I think gets it doesn't get as much focus in today's day and age as it should by the trained professional wrestler because we think, oh, I'll shoot them off and we'll do this and the up and up. But once you take that level of expectation out of it, now it becomes a we're going through the motions as opposed to where if you do something this is so hard to explain. Um, I'll give you an example. I'll give
Okay.
you an example. You know what an Irish whip is, right?
Yes.
You grab the guy's wrist and you throw him across the ring.
I appreciate you asking to make sure, but yes, yes.
Yeah, no, well, people are going to be watching this who have no idea about
Exactly.
professional
Yeah,
wrestling.
it's throwing them into the ropes with the
Yeah,
assumption
it
they're going to
doesn't
come
need to be
back
in the
at you.
example I'll give you is turnbuckle to turnbuckle, right?
Okay.
If I have one guy in a turnbuckle and I go to Irish whip him from one turnbuckle to the other turnbuckle, and the spot we call in the back is what we call an up and over, right? Which means that he grabs the buckle and he kicks his hips and his legs up and he basically leapfrogs over you and you go underneath him into the buckle.
Okay.
That's the spot called, right? So as a professional wrestler, we called that in the back. I know that's going to happen. So what you see a lot from professional wrestlers is they shoot the guy off and then they run in, ducking, expecting the person to do an up and over.
Hmm.
To me, that's a disassociation from the truth that we are trying to portray. The truth we are trying to portray is that I'm shooting him into the buckle so he will land and hit his back in the buckle and be hurt. And then I can come in and attack him with a clothesline or whatever. So I need to change what I know is going to happen, which is an up and over, and change my reality and my expectation to say, oh no, I expect him to hit with his back so that I can attack him with a clothesline. So when I shoot him in for that pre-planned spot of the up and over, I'm going in with the mindset of I'm going to clothesline his head off once his back hits. And then when that doesn't happen, it's a surprise to me and I have to adjust what's happening. That's how you simulate a real fight. Because in a real fight, you don't go, okay, I'm going to duck his punch, and then I'm going to. You just see a punch coming, and you got to block it. You
Hmm.
you you see a leg sweep coming, and you hope that you see it, and you get out of the way. That's the part of professional wrestling that can take what is a great match and make it an outstanding match, in my opinion. Right? Because there's tons of people can do great, fantastic spots. The level of professional wrestling right now, in terms of athleticism, is at an all-time high. Nobody thinks more of that and that style and that athleticism than me. You can just watch my matches. I do all sorts of flips and crazy nonsense and dives to the outside, and I think it's all wonderful. I think we can take that and take it to the next level by integrating a lot of that sort of quote unquote old school fundamentals into it. And a lot of that starts with expectation and reality.
Okay.
I don't even know why I'm talking about this, but I think it
No, no,
relates.
this is I honestly about a minute ago I realized, oh wait, I had to remember I had to ask another question. I was just dude, I was just listening. Like you kind of like you read me and I was so fascinated with that yeah, of
Yeah.
that idea of like your character
Did I answer
doesn't
your
know.
question? I don't even remember what you asked.
It was originally just how I think we started with like how much of it was planned out or how much of the
Oh my god. Right,
was
yeah.
improvised. No, you're good.
So I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version. A lot of it is planned out. There's a section of it that I love to do what's quote unquote on the fly, and that's the part where the bad guy is usually in control. I think a lot of that comes off a lot more natural if you're listening to the crowd and you're not pre-planned and sitting in your spots and trying to get to different spots. I think if you just feel a portion of that. That being said, as much of it that I can leave open, I try to,
Hmm.
just because I trust myself and I trust my experience. Um, so yeah, long story short, probably most matches that you see on a day-to-day basis, especially on television, probably 70% called in the back.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
so then for how much of it you may run through ahead of time. You said something, you used that phrasing of just being able to run through it ahead of time, kind of have an idea of what you're going to do. Running through a match, like does that look like a table read situation where you know the phrasing enough that you don't have to physically walk through it? Or do you physically maybe go to, are you in like I'm picturing like this practice ring that's like a portion and you kind of walk through it, like, because I did theater as a kid, so I know you're not fully acting, you're not fully doing out, but you're walking through it.
It's so funny to hear you ask that because because we live this situation and we see it on a week to week basis. You know, I've been living the exact situation that you're describing
Yeah,
for years, if not decades, and it's funny to hear someone who cares that much about the intricacies of it. So I appreciate
it's what I think
your
about. It's
yeah,
the stuff I
no,
think about.
what you described is exactly correct. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
there's both situations. It depends, but yeah, more often than not, it's what you described as the table read situation, which is just two guys sitting in a locker room or girls, whoever,
Hmm.
just sitting in a locker room next to each other, and you just the lingo is very funny. Lots of swearing, tons of swear, and then you kind of act out the motions of it. I'll give you a there's probably pro wrestlers who are going to be mad at me about this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I don't give a shit. Um,
Okay.
if I were walking through a match with you, this is what it would sound like. I'd say, okay, so lock up. I'll grab your fucking head. You shoot me off. I'll tackle, big tackle, boom, feast your fucking eyes. I'll take off, drop down, leapfrog, drop kick. You power to the outside. Yeah, big fire up for me. I'll spill the outside. You come to grab me. I'll pull you out. Bang, duck that, go under, bip. I'll wrap you up on the rope. Boom, you take the post. Ah, fuck, you do that. You know that this is exactly what it sounds like.
Okay.
And to a layman, you have no idea what I'm talking about. To the guy I'm communicating with, it's like we're speaking each other's language. They know exactly what I'm talking about. They know exactly what I'm saying, and it makes complete sense to us. And it's just communicating the complete basics of everything that's happening. That's how we would rehearse calling a match to each other.
Okay.
Uh, that's if we already know it in advance. The process of creating it is much different. It's like,
I believe that.
what do you do? You know, what are your moves? How can I make that fit? What do you know? So that's more of an intricate process. Once it's settled, then you do that. And then there's the portion of it that you talked about, which is if we have time and a ring to get in. Yeah, you ask for some space in the ring. The ring is filled up with wrestlers. Like someone's doing something in this corner, someone's doing something in
Oh,
this corner, someone's doing something in this corner, someone's practicing something on the outside. Everyone's just kind of floating. Hey, can we have this corner? We're going to practice a thing where I lift him up on my shoulders and then he's going to jump up to the top rope. Yeah, sure. Everybody creates some space for you. You try the thing. He catches you in the thing. Okay, yeah, we got it. Okay, thanks for the space. Thanks for the time. That's that's kinda what it is, yeah.
oh,
Or or if it's an NXT type scenario where you literally have a whole training facility with, like, 6 wide open rings, you can go over to the ring and just walk through the entire thing if you want, which is great. It's great
that's
to
cool.
have that option, especially with someone who's not wrestled a TV match before. It's like, "Yeah, of course I wanna feel the whole thing and see if you can get me up for this, and I'm going to lift you for that." And then you walk and you have your producer there and he's timing the whole thing. It's like, yep, you guys nailed the time. You know, that's a wonderful luxury that you just don't get on the indies. But in NXT, yeah, you got 5 rings sitting there. Why wouldn't you use them?
Right. Okay. So you kind of answered this, so just in case, I'll ask it. But it sounds like when you're running through that, it's very, you're laying out step by step. Like when you're talking about verbally going through like a table read, that it's
Yep.
like step by step and you know the lingo. What I was going to ask was if you're familiar at all with chess, which I'm not super chess savvy. But I
Okay.
understand that when you open, there's like an opening that you can like just say the name of, and it'll usually describe what your goal is for the first handful of moves or sequences. Is there anything like that in pro wrestling where it's like, yeah, okay, we'll open it with the blank, and that gets you the first I don't know. Kind of fill in the blanks here. Maybe like a 15-second sequence where yeah, we'll start with this. We'll start with this kind of opening, and maybe that carries you for the first few sequences before you get into something else. Or is it strictly step by step, kind of like how you described it?
There's a blueprint. There's
Okay,
there's a there's a blueprint. I'm sure this has been discussed at length somewhere before on pro wrestling channels or whatever. Um, if I'm telling stories out of school, so be it. I mean, people are interested. It doesn't matter. The first portion of a match is called a shine. A shine is where you again. This doesn't apply to every match,
of
but
course.
if it's a blank match, it's a blank slate. Two people going out to the ring. Nobody knows who either of them are. This is what you do, or this is a format you can use that is pretty standard in the world of professional wrestling. And ironically, not just in the world of professional wrestling, but all forms of entertainment. It's literally derived from Shakespeare. This
Okay,
is a Shakespearean flow to storytelling. There's the shine, which is the telling of the story. It's here's the protagonist and why you should like them. In the pro wrestling terms, that's the babyface, and here's why you should like this babyface. And here's the bad guy, here's the quote unquote heel, and why you shouldn't like him. That's what you do. Then you get to a quote unquote cutoff. This is the where everything starts to go wrong. Everything falls off a cliff. This is where Romeo and Juliet discover that they're not allowed to see each other anymore. Um, then there's the heat. This is the struggle. This is where the bad guy starts to take advantage of their quote unquote cutoff, their shortcut, where they had to take advantage, and now they're just beating the tar out of you. And this is a good guy persevering through turmoil. This happens in every movie you've ever watched.
okay,
There's a struggle. My wife left me, and I need to figure out how to get through life. And then there's a comeback. This is where the protagonist perseveres. This is the babyface finally getting his comeuppance, beating the shit out of the heel, and uh, and then ultimately that leads to false finishes, which is where you think the movie's going to end, but it doesn't. Then there's a swerve, and then there's another thing, and then finally the movie ends at the climax. We have the same structure in professional wrestling. It's basic storytelling. We just give it different names.
okay. And then with that communication, especially if you may be working with someone that you aren't particularly familiar with, or even if you are, what does that communication that we talked about look like, or how does that go with, maybe especially in pro wrestling where there's wrestlers from all around the world? What does that look like when there's any sort of communication barrier or a language barrier, especially if it's calling something in the ring, or if you're calling it beforehand? Is there an adjustment that's made, or is there a common language, especially in the ring, that is stuck to when two people who maybe have a language barrier need to be able to communicate and keep each other safe and get through the match?
Great question. Everybody speaks pro wrestling.
Oh,
Everybody speaks pro wrestling.
okay.
Every move is called the same move. Every move is slight differences. In Japan, a suplex is called a brain buster. You need to know the difference between a brain buster and an actual brain buster. Um, Other than that, people people nowadays they talk too much in the ring, and I'm a huge fan of communication. I think that communication is wonderful, and you should communicate everything. But what I mean by that is people say too many words. You don't need to say words. All you need to speak is wrestling, right? If I
So like one word phrases or like portions of it, do you mean? Or
oh yeah, that's all you need. You- uh, I tell kids in training this all the time. They'll grab a chin lock and they're like, okay, I'm supposed to communicate. So they'll be like, okay, I need you to feed up, and then I need you to grab my hair, and then to hit me a couple times, and I'm gonna take off. I'm gonna hit the ropes, and then you drop down, and then you leapfrog, and then you don't need to say all that because almost all of that is going to happen regardless. All you need to give is the smallest of reminders of cues of what they need, right? So if I have a guy in a chin lock and I need him to remember the match, if he's not hitting me, I'll say, hit me. And then he starts hitting me, and then I'll be like, drop, leap, drop kick. That's it. Drop leap, drop kick. Even if someone in the front of the crowd hears it, if someone in the front row or there's a camera right on you and they hear you say drop leap, drop kick, they'll be like, oh, what? It doesn't even register as words. It's just like, oh, he's just talking shit or something, right? But I don't need 20 sentences to say what we're gonna do. You hear drop leap, drop kick. If you're a trained professional wrestler, you know exactly what that means. It means drop down, leapfrog, drop kick me.
So basically you're trusting, but by being able to give just such a quick note to them, that's you having to trust they're professional, that they will know what it is. Whereas if somebody spells it out for you, is that any indicator of a lack of trust?
Not only trusting them, but trusting myself and the way that I've prepared them. Because theoretically, if I'm saying that few amount of words, that means that we've talked about it extensively in the back, and all they need is a quick verbal cue to remember what we discussed 30 times in the back.
Okay.
So I need to trust myself as much as I'm trusting them. But yeah, there's a huge element of trust. Huge. Not just with memory, but with safety. More important
Uh-huh.
than that, you can forget the whole match. I don't give a shit about that. But if you're don't grab me and give me a move that we didn't talk about, right?
Fair, very
Don't do
fair.
that. Yeah,
Okay. So talked about in the ring, maybe the planning of the matches. Um, is there any communication, well, like talking about an entire card? Is there
yeah.
communication between different matches on the card to maybe make sure two matches aren't planning on hitting the same big spot, or to make sure there's not some repetition? Like we already saw that earlier in the night, kind of avoidance. Does that work at all?
There used to be a lot back when I started. This used to be a huge focal point. Not so much anymore. There should be more of it.
Okay.
Um, for different reasons than people think. At some point in it's probably been a slow trend over the course of 20 or 30 years or whatever that I just, only got the tail end of. At some point, it became about like protecting your moves, which is a very archaic concept to me.
Like not getting like, your move kicked out of it, do you mean?
Like,
Or making it look weak rather?
yeah, the general thought process was always like, oh, that's so and so's finisher, so don't do it before them, which it doesn't really work that way. Um, I think even like I'm not going to give specific examples because
That's
I'm
fine.
gonna get I'm gonna get torn apart for saying this stuff. But let's use a choke slam for example.
Sure.
The champion's move is a choke slam, so nobody else do a choke slam. I've never subscribed to that because not me personally, but like I've never subscribed to that theory because if they're the champion and it's their established move and they've beat everyone with it, I don't think anyone in the crowd cares about Billy Bob doing a choke slam in match 4 if champion Phil or champion Fred or whoever has this established choke, they're gonna pop huge for champion Fred's choke slam because he's the champion. He's doing his move.
Mhm.
That's his move. He's won all these matches with it. Big pop. They don't care that Billy Bob did it in match 5. What fans do care about is repetition, right? That's where there needs to be more communication because if they've seen 18 choke slams throughout the match or throughout the card, if there was a choke slam in match 1, there's a choke slam in match 3, and then there was a choke slam in match 5. By the time you get to choke slam 8 or whatever, even if it's the choke slam before that, because the champions will probably still get a good reaction because he's the champion. That being said, if there's 12 superplexes on the card, suplex number 11 is not going to get a great reaction
Mhm.
because they've seen 10 superplexes already.
Yeah.
That's where there needs to be more communication because we're doing a disservice to ourselves and we're doing a disservice to the fans. So it's the process of repetition that I think should be more of a focal point rather than, oh, you're taking away from my move. Well, if it's your move, then you should be doing it better than someone else, right? Like I've never been like, oh, I'm doing a moonsault in the main event, so nobody do a moonsault before me. Do you know why I don't say that? Because I'm 6'7" and I get further on my moonsault than anybody else does. So I know the crowd is going to like my moonsault better than Fred's moonsault in match 2 or match 4. That's because I'm confident in my work and I've worked really hard on it. So I'm not intimidated by someone else doing the same move that I didn't invent the moonsault. It's not my move. I don't care. If somebody wants to do the move I use for a finisher before me, go for it. Mine should get a better reaction because I've established it over the course of 10 years. You shouldn't be worried about that.
As the pro wrestler, how much influence do you get on that's going to be my finisher and I'm going to call it this? Or like feast your eyes, for example. I don't personally know where that comes from. Is that something that you've had for a long time that you came up with yourself? I'm very curious of the level of control that you may have over your branding and how you want to present yourself, sell yourself, whether it be merch or finisher names, stuff like that.
It's a mixed bag.
Hmm.
Uh, I've never personally heard an anecdote of someone being given a finisher or be given like a name. I the branding part of it does that's a mixed bag. Sometimes it's, oh, I call this move Feast Your Eyes, and sometimes it's like, no, 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 that's going to be called the Dijak Destroyer or whatever, well, whatever they say. And then you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's what it's called. Uh, I came up with Feast Your Eyes. It was just a thing I was yelling, like, hey, look at me, I'm big and tall and imposing. I started yelling that around like 2013. I came up with the mechanics of the finisher in like 2013 at some point. Yeah, it's been done in incarnations before. No, nobody invents anything. You know, is I like to think that I do that style of it as uniquely as possible. And I've had my fair share of meltdowns on Twitter and everything. It's it's
I've seen your work. I've seen your work on Twitter.
yeah, it doesn't matter. I've freaked out about things that don't matter before. It's all I don't care. At a point, I probably cared. I've said stupid stuff in the past. I've done dumb things in the past. We all grow and we all learn. It doesn't matter. Nobody owns anything. None of it matters. It really does. It really just doesn't matter. So yeah, when I came to WWE, for example, I said, yeah, I use this torture rack into a GTS type thing. I'll do it on TV and see if anybody says anything. I'll tell the announcers it's called Feast Your Eyes. We'll see if they say it. They did. It all went fine. Nobody questioned it or anything. So I just kept using it. Uh, if somebody had come to me and been like, "Hey, don't use that move. It's too close to Hideo Itami's move, or it's too close to CM Punk's move, or whatever," I would have been
Hmm.
like, "All right, what? Who cares? I'll do something else." I was honestly prepared for that conversation. As we trended along in the professional wrestling landscape, pro wrestling just trended in a direction where people stopped caring so much about stuff like that. You start to see more people doing cutters and stuff like that, even though Randy, obviously, I think Randy realized at some point, like, all right, if everyone else wants to do a cutter, I'm doing an RKO and I'm Randy Orton, so who gives a shit, right? Because at the end of the day, if I do a cutter, people will be like, oh, cool cutter. If Randy Orton does an RKO, people are like, oh,
RKO out of nowhere.
yeah, exactly, right? I think everybody realized that at some point, and
Yeah.
everybody kind of stopped caring. So, which is good. Which is good. Again, I don't think there should be 16 cutters in a row on a show. I think that takes away from the show. But yeah, I think from a personal aspect, yeah, you say, hey, I'm doing this cool move, and what do you think about that as a finisher? Yeah, it sounds good. What do you want to call it? Oh, I'll call it the Flippy Magoo, and then, oh yeah, cool name, Flippy Magoo. We'll see if it catches. And then they either trademark it and it becomes theirs, or it's your IP or whatever. You figure out the legality of it after.
So I mean, I know this isn't really part of. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a bad assumption to assume it's not part of like uh your persona or a branding or anything. But I mean, you brought up Twitter, so
Yeah.
the whole ratio thing.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I have a question about it. It's more of like I don't even have a real specific question about it. Just
I don't know if I have an answer.
that's just a thing? Like it just kind of came out of nowhere? Is that something you've been doing for a long time? Or
No, I first did it. Been less than a year actually. The first time I did it was January 1st of 2024. I thought it was just some silly nonsense, and I the NXT account made a post or something. It's just one of those like Thursday like throwaway like, oh, it's noon, so here's a recap of what happened on Tuesday or whatever. And the posts would never get much interaction, so I was always like, ugh. I would usually just see it. It would pop up on my phone, and I'd retweet it, and then we'd move on. And I remember I was like giving my son a bath or whatever, and I was just sitting there, and it popped up on my phone, and I was like, how can I get more out of these random throwaway tweets? Because it's like the NXT account, and it like that. I wish these things would get like more interaction. So I was like, I'll see if I can ratio it. Like I don't
Just to see.
just to be funny, just to be like, oh, I'm gonna ratio the NXT account. And then it happened, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And what I noticed from that is it was just gonna be a one-off. I was just gonna do it once and be like, oh, that's funny, and it was a funny thing. What I noticed from it is that my thing got a lot of likes, but it increased the viewership and it increased
Of the original
uh,
post, like the
the original post. So I was like, oh, this helps my employer, the guys that I work with in the social media department. This probably gets them more views and gets them more interaction, and then that makes
it's
the
good for everybody.
NXT. Yeah, yeah. So it helps me, it helps them. I'm like, why wouldn't I do this all the time? So I just started doing it all the time as like a joke, and then people started to enjoy it. And then like anything in the wrestling landscape or really in the entertainment landscape, it started to polarize people. And now there's a huge group of people who love it, a huge group of people who think that I'm
Oh God.
a complete goof. And there's a ton of people who attribute the ratio stuff to, oh, this is why WWE let him go,
Oh God.
which I think is hilarious. And I don't know the reason why WWE decided not to renew my
I'm
contract. I
not
was never given
asking.
no, I understand. If it is because of ratios, that's extremely funny, and I don't
Because that
I
means
think
there's
that's
someone somewhere that's just upset by it that told someone who told someone, if that were the case.
the only communication I ever received from WWE was that they thought it was hilarious and to keep doing it. That's the only communication I ever got. So I
So
was
there
like,
you go.
"Okay, I'm doing it then." So I very much doubt that played a factor, but if it did, so be it. I don't it doesn't matter.
Personally, I do enjoy I like the interaction that in
I
general, not just the ratio thing, but the interaction in general that you get with pro wrestling.
I think the people on Twitter take Twitter so seriously, and
Yes.
I do not take Twitter seriously, and I think that that's, like, why it's fun for me
I think that's a healthy
because,
approach to Twitter.
like, who could possibly it's such a fraction of the audience. It's such a mi I
It's
think
a
I saw a
vocal
metric
minority.
once I think I saw a metric once that, like, 1% of 1% of the audience who actually watches the programming is talking about it on Twitter. So it's just so funny to me that we put so much stock into, oh, this went viral and this got 1,000 retweets and oh my gosh, it's very much just I think it's a helpful snapshot, like in like a what's the word? It gives you like a general idea of how something is being perceived. Like, oh, if on Twitter people like it, then maybe in the mass, like people like it exponentially more or whatever. What's the term in voting where they get like an exit poll and it gives you like a can't even remember what there's a
I'm not
phrase for
100%
this
sure.
where you get like TV ratings do it too, right? They'll survey like 1,000 households and then they'll get like a percentage and then
Hmm.
they'll multiply that by 10,000 or whatever to get you the actual number. I think it's a helpful metric in terms of that. And it was even more so during the pandemic when we literally did not have an audience and that was our only audience. So we're
Hmm.
like, okay, how's this being received by anybody?
You just got to check
Um,
Twitter, I guess.
but beyond that, yeah, but beyond that, it's like it's just Twitter, guys. Like nobody, it doesn't matter. It doesn't unless you say something horrible, like
Yeah.
completely egregious, and just expose yourself as a terrible human being. Like other than that, you just it's just silly nonsense. Like who cares?
How could you help someone that you want to get into pro wrestling who can't get past something? Maybe they haven't really given it a shot, and on the outside, they only think of it. They've only ever heard of it as that's the fake fighting show. because unfortunately that's how it was kept from me as a kid. It was never
Yeah.
on the TV in the living room because my parents were like, no, that's not real. We'll watch this instead. Or like, you know, MMA, whatever. How can you get someone maybe who's only heard that their whole life and they're like they won't even really give it a chance because of it? Is there a certain approach that you could take to get them to just to not look at it in that light, or is it just on is it on them?
I don't know how else to phrase this to you other than I am the exact wrong person to be asking this question because I spend my whole life doing the exact opposite,
Oh,
which is
really?
I am so surrounded and inundated by professional wrestling. It absorbs my brain. It's all I think about. I'm literally obsessed with it. 5 minutes in the day don't go by without me thinking about something I have with wrestling or wondering about something or some match that I have. So much so that I look for any excuse to not be thinking about and surrounded by
That's
professional
fair.
wrestling. I praise God every day that my wife wants nothing to do with professional wrestling because she is absolutely 100% my escape from my own brain because she doesn't care about it at all. And thank God, because if she wanted to talk about matches in pro wrestling, I would be drowning in it constantly. So
Okay.
I do the exact opposite. I gotta find
You
ways
try to
to
associate with people who don't
I
consume that.
I all of my best friends are professional wrestlers. We're in group chats where we talk about professional wrestling constantly. So it's not that I don't, because obviously, like I said, I'm obsessed with it. It's all I talk about. But like outside of that bubble of people that I trust and people that I know and people that I want to talk about it with, then I don't want to speak about it.
Fair.
Right? So like when like uh, random person at the mall comes up to me and they're like, "Oh, hey, I recognize you." And I'm like, "Oh, it's great to meet you." And then they start talking about professional wrestling. That's when I'm like, "Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend my
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to go into what I thought like that's probably a bad example. Man, I don't even know how to phrase this.
I think I know where you're coming from. It's more of like, cause like you said, you've had it your whole life. It is your whole life. It consumes you. And so as
Yeah.
someone coming in fresh, you know, fair enough that I would assume, or not that I would assume, but I'm in a different position where I look around and I'm like, guys, I found this thing.
Yeah.
You got to check it out. So it's definitely a
Yeah.
different perspective
I
there where
have I have that group and I have my friend. I've got 10 of the closest friends in the world, and these are my brothers, and these are the people that I talk about wrestling with every single day, and I trust them, and these are the people I bounce ideas off of, and we're constantly in communication about it. So for me, it's very difficult to talk about professional wrestling outside of that context. This is different because this is part of my work, right? This is part of my job. So like I love doing this because this is my job. This is what I do, right? This falls into the here's what I do for a living bubble, right? Then when I go to training, I love talking about professional wrestling. I'm going to go do a seminar today. Can't wait for it. I can't wait to talk. It's going to be a bunch of new faces, a bunch of people who are excited to learn about professional wrestling. It's when you get those like out of work scenarios where it's like, oh, we're at like a family function and someone comes up to me, they're like, "Hey, how's the wrestling business going?" I'm just like, "Ah, God." Like,
how's that wrestling going?
please, I was prepared to not talk about wrestling right
That's
now. Like,
totally
please
fair.
let me play with my kids and let me eat some nice food and talk to my wife. Like, I don't want to talk about Monday Night Raw right now. So
That's
it's just this
totally fair.
weird like double life sort of thing that I gotta mix everything and combine. So yeah. Long story short, I don't have an answer for you. I'm
No,
sorry.
I mean, it's more of an answer than you think. I actually really appreciate that insight. So that's about as much time as we have for the YouTube. Those of you who you don't know this yet, but I did ask Dijak what his favorite match was in his past, so we're going to talk about that. And those of you who are already on the Patreon at this point will have already gotten to see that match, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. over on the Patreon. Dijak, is there anything while we're still on YouTube that you want to promote or talk about?
Everything's Dijak FYE. Uh, I post matches and stuff on there all the time. I retweet everything, and that's just where you can find all my stuff on all social media platforms.
Awesome. Really appreciate that. I appreciate you taking your time to be here. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you over on the Patreon.